is Sharawa, and the one just to the left of that, at the top of Geshe Podawa, is Geshe Chekawa. Geshe Chekawa was one of the, as you can see, is one of the Lanrim lineage lamas. Langri Tangpa is not, I don't think is found in the Kadampa Geshes in the Lanrim there. Geshe Chekawa had, before he got very, very involved in the teachings, he had read the text of the 8 verses, and he had some questions about them. So he wanted to see Geshe Langri Tangpa, who had written the 8 verses, but Geshe Langri Tangpa had passed away at that time. So Geshe Chekawa went to see one of the other lamas, one of the other Lanrim lamas, and I'll just mention a little something from the text by Thupten Jinpa called Essential Mind Training. You may have seen that text. In that he says, he tells a little story about Geshe Chekawa. Geshe Chekawa, who wrote the 7-point training of the mind, which is a more extensive Lanrim training of the mind, a much more extensive one that's studied in all of the Tibetan traditions. He says, Geshe Chekawa, having been intrigued by the powerful altruistic sentiments expressed in Langri Tangpa's 8 verses, such as, may I accept upon myself the defeat and offer to others the victory, Chekawa asked Geshe Sharawa, who was one of the other Lanrim lineage lamas, whether scriptural basis. And the teacher then cited, Geshe Sharawa cited some teachings from Nagarjuna's Precious Garland and asks if there's anyone who does not accept the authority of Nagarjuna. And so according to Chekawa, several sutras and early Indian treatises stand out as the primary source of mind training teachings, but the most important undoubtedly are Nagarjuna's Precious Garland and Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. A little bit more elaborated story is in the commentary to the 7 verses called Mind Training Like Rays of the Sun, that came out with the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives many years ago. And there it tells, it says, the great Geshe Chekawa first received the teachings on the 8 verses from Nelchag Shingpa. This had the effect of arousing his faith and interest in the Kadampa teachings, and he set out for Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, with the intention of seeking teachings on mind training in greater detail. Some of his worthy friends suggested since a master of the great vehicle should be held in high esteem of others, like the sun and the moon, it would be best for him to approach the great Sharawa and Jalyulwa directly. Accordingly, he went to the house of Zhou in Lhasa, where Sharawa was staying. Now it's similar to the other story. When he arrived, the master was teaching, Geshe Charawa was teaching about the spiritual levels of the low vehicle's hearers. This is what we call the Shravaka Bhumi by Asanga. So he was teaching this, which tells all of the various levels of the practicing of the Hinayana path, the hearers. So after listening to him, however, Chekawa felt no inspiration at all, because he was interested in the Mahayana and in mind training, and instead became despondent and confused. In despair, he resigned himself to fulfilling the quest elsewhere if, when asked directly, Sharawa revealed that he did not hold the tradition of teachings on mind training, that they could not be taken to heart in practice. So in other words, he was thinking maybe, although he had been led to believe Geshe Sharawa would be an expert on the 8 verses, he was thinking maybe he only taught the Hinayana path, the hearer's vehicle. So the next day, after lunch offering had been made to the monastic community, while the master was circumambulating a stupa, the reliquary monument to the Buddha mind, Chekawa approached Geshe Sharawa, spreading a cloth on a prominent ledge. He said, "Will you please sit down? I have something I would like to discuss with you." The master replied, Sharawa replied, "Teacher, what is it that you haven't understood? I made everything absolutely clear when I sat on the religious throne." So when he was teaching the Bodhisattva Bhumi, on the Shravaka Bhumi. Chekawa then produced the 8 verses for training the mind by Langri Tangpa and said, "I was wondering whether you hold the tradition of this teaching," so the Mahayana teaching, the 8 verses, the training of the mind. "I found that it often helps my useless self just a little when all my thoughts run wild, or in times of hardship when I'm unable to find shelter, or when I'm scorned or cast out by others. Yet I also find that there seem to be a few occasions when it is not so appropriate to practice, maybe not so easy to practice. Therefore, I humbly ask whether it is really worth putting into practice or not. Will the final result of such practice be actually to lead one to the final awakened state or not?" Geshe Sharawa first completed counting the round of his Bodhi seed rosary. He was maybe like Geshe Trini or Ken Rinpoche. Maybe you ask a question and he finishes reciting his mantras first, and then he put that down and rolling it up, composing himself and preparing his reply. Teacher, so this is Sharawa talking to Geshe Chekawa. There's no question whether this practice is appropriate or not. If you have no desire for the one and only state of fully awakened being, you can leave it aside. However, should you yearn for such a state, it is impossible to attain without directly entering this spiritual vehicle. Very well. As this is a Buddhist tradition, I am interested to know where the definitive reference for this practice and experience may be found, since a religious quotation requires a spiritual reference. Do you recollect where it might be? And Sharawa said, "Who would not recognize it as from the impeccable work of the truly exalted Master Nagarjuna? It comes from his precious garland of advice to the king that says, 'May their evil bear fruit for me, may my virtue bear fruit for others.' O gentle sir, I have such a deep faith in that teaching. Please, out of your kindness, take me under your guidance." And so that was the beginning of Chekawa's study for many, many years of the lojong, training of the mind. And he wrote a commentary to Geshe Langri Tangpa's 8 verses of training the mind that is often used. So we're going to be using that kind of tradition. And just in essence, just as a general summary, the training of the mind, lojong, the main purpose of that is to develop what we call the 2 Bodhi minds, the 2 bodhicittas. So you may know the term bodhicitta, maybe not. I'm not sure what the composition of the group is here. I can't see you all. Bodhicitta is a particular Mahayana state of mind that cherishes others more important than oneself, that holds others as more important than oneself, and works to achieve enlightenment for their benefit. It's a mind that's based on great compassion, as its accompanying mind. It's always present, great compassion for others. And it's a mind that is aiming to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of others. So that's what we usually call conventional bodhicitta, a mind that's working to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. But to really achieve that goal, we have to also augment that, to unify that with a state of mind that realizes, a wisdom that realizes emptiness, the ultimate nature of all phenomena, realizes what in Sanskrit we call shunyata, the Tibetans say tongbani, emptiness. That understanding of emptiness within the continuum of an individual, within the mind of an individual who has developed conventional bodhicitta, the realization of emptiness is called ultimate bodhicitta within the mind of that person. So it's said sometimes that the aim of the lojong is to develop the two bodhicittas. The conventional bodhicitta that's aiming to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings, and the wisdom of emptiness that is within the continuum of that. So it's all of our practice as a Mahayana practitioner could be kind of condensed into those two. If you're familiar with the teachings of Lama Tsongkhapa, with the teachings on the three principles of the path, you know there's another thing. Besides bodhicitta and the wisdom of emptiness, there's something that we call renunciation. Renunciation is the basis for developing bodhicitta. It's the basis for having the energy to try to understand emptiness and to work to achieve liberation. So it is in no conflict with other teachings that you received on the stages of the path or on the three principal aspects of the path. That famous text written by Lama Tsongkhapa called the three principles of the aspects of the path. The three aspects that he said condense all of the teachings are renunciation, bodhicitta, conventional bodhicitta, and the wisdom that realizes emptiness. So those two, conventional bodhicitta and the wisdom that realizes emptiness, are called the conventional bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta. So this particular text, as I've mentioned, the kind of connection with Geshe Chekawa. Geshe Chekawa wrote the 7 verses of the 7-point training of the mind, which you may have received from Ken Rinpoche or from other lamas, a much more extensive one. But Geshe Chekawa was motivated in composing that by Geshe Langri Tangpa's 8 verses of training the mind. And that's the more simple one that we're going to be talking about. Even that text alone, to really go into detail of it, would take us many, many sessions. So we just have 4 Sundays. Here it's Saturday night, you're Sunday morning there. We just have 4 sessions to cover this. So we'll try to talk about that in a general way as an introduction. And you might consider it to be an introduction to the 7-point training of the mind. So if you get a chance later, if you have not already received teachings from Ken Rinpoche or Lama Zopa Rinpoche on the 7 verses of the training of the mind, or if you haven't read that literature before, you could consider this set of teachings kind of an introduction to that. So again, as a general factor, if we ask, what's the general precept, the general idea of training the mind? Well, you could say there are a couple of different things. Mainly, it's how to train the mind in the two bodhicittas, how to develop conventional bodhicitta that's based on compassion and overcoming one's own self-concern, one's own self-cherishing, and to develop the ultimate wisdom of emptiness that helps you to overcome the self-grasping. So these are two concepts that you may have heard before. Self-cherishing is the mind that has to be overcome to enter into the Mahayana path. Self-cherishing. Self-cherishing is a mind that considers my own importance and happiness and welfare more important than that of others. Usually we cherish ourselves more than others. We may have from a worldly point of view, we may have the sense of family being more important than myself, or my nation, or if you think of some science fiction, like people from other planets coming, maybe we consider the human race more important than these aliens, something like that. All of these might fall under self-cherishing. The mind of bodhicitta is one that has overcome self-cherishing and cherishes others more than oneself. Not just, just the sectarian view of one's own family or one's own tradition or one's own country. That is not considered to be bodhicitta, although it's probably much more altruistic than one who only thinks of oneself. One of the other hallmarks of the training of the mind that was brought to Tibet from Atisha to the Kadampa Geshes was how to transform the problems, the adverse conditions that we encounter in a degenerate age like this that we are in now, how to use that to enhance one's practice of the path. Otherwise, if you don't have a method to do that, one can be overcome with distress and sorrow, say, for instance, with the COVID-19 epidemic that's covered the whole earth now, worrying about that. The political upheaval in the United States right now, if you've heard about that kind of thing, worrying about all of these political and worldly things. That could seem like, oh, how can I practice the path? There's so much to worry about. How can I possibly put my mind into practicing the Buddhist path, becoming a bodhisattva, achieving enlightenment? So the training of the mind includes many methods to be able to take those what seemingly from a worldly point of view are bad conditions, what we call adverse conditions, something that would seem to be problematic, that would hinder our practice, to be able to utilize them and transform them in such a way that they enhance our practice. So one of the very special practices that we will be talking about that are inherent in this training of the mind is a practice you may have heard of called Tong Len. Tong is a Tibetan word that means to give, to present. Len means to take, to accept. Lempa, Tong Len, giving and taking, you could say. So it's not talking about giving food or taking resources from others. It's talking about a method to transform adverse conditions into the path, in which you imagine the problems that one encounters to help to erode one's self-cherishing thought, one's not just one's ego, not just one's self-grasping, but that an imprint of that self-grasping that we call self-cherishing, the mind that wants to work for oneself alone. You imagine taking that on and eroding, bearing with the problem, thinking, oh, this is great. This is helping me in the sense that it's eroding my self-cherishing thought. And you imagine, both in thought and in deed, you imagine sending out one's belongings, one's body, even the merits that one has collected in the past and the present, and that one will collect in the future. Imagine sending them out to other sentient beings. This is the giving part. But in actuality, as one of the verses later in the 8 verses says, one does it practically also. In the immediate, one tries to be generous, to give what others need, both in terms of advice and in care and in resources, whatever one can provide to others. And in the real sense, take on the responsibility of others, the hardships of others, helping others, like taking on the suffering so that one doesn't obsess with one's own problems. I found my teacher Lama Yeshe, who some of you know, whose biography was just published, called Big Love. Maybe some of you already have a copy. Lama Yeshe used to say that was, the lojong and the practice of tonglen, where you could take on the problems of others. Imagine accepting them, even if it's in a sense of just in imagination. Within a crowd, you're not actually doing anything to help others, but imagine taking on their suffering, their bad actions, or their whatever negativities that they're exhibiting. Imagine you yourself almost like breathing them in so that they're no longer existing with others. And you let them sit at your heart chakra, where the self-cherishing thought has a special base. We'll talk more about this as we go along. And then you imagine sending out, even in imagination, your merits, your teachings, and so forth, to help to provide some resource for others. I keep on seeing messages on my screen. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to do anything. I guess not. So let me begin with the first verse. And some of you may have the 8 verses of training the mind. You may have memorized them. You may recite them all the time. We'll be using as a basis the FPMT copy of this. And so that you see on your screen, at least I see on my screen, determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit from all sentient beings who are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel, I hold the most dear at all times. Yes, that's the copy that I have. That's what you find in the FPMT prayer book. So there are other translations that you may encounter sometime. This is the first verse. So this is kind of if you recite these verses every day and meditate on them, they can become kind of your North Star, your guiding star to get you through problems. So I might rephrase it in various ways during the talk. So I might say, instead of saying determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit, I might say responsible to obtain the greatest benefit for all sentient beings who are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel, than the wish-granting jewel. I will cherish them most dear. I will always cherish them as most dear. So what's the change of words? You may, if you recite these every day, you may like to either just use this FPMT version, which is one that's recited when we do practices together, or you may like to change it slightly into words that have more meaning for you. For instance, the Tibetan term where we say determined might be samba, but in the higher teachings, when we talk about developing bodhicitta, the last stage before developing bodhicitta is what we call laksam, exceptional determination or exceptional view. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has translated that as universal responsibility, having taken on the more than just great compassion. It's a state of mind that has come to the conclusion that I myself must bring about the welfare of other sentient beings, and I myself will do that. So I'm responsible for that. So I take that first word to go beyond just determined, like, I'm going to do that. That's fine too. But, responsible, just in the same sense that one might think, I'm responsible to take care of my mom and dad, my mother and father, my grandfather, my grandmother, the children. I have a responsibility to do that. How does one develop that determination or that sense of responsibility to bring about the greatest benefit for sentient beings? Well, one has to train one's mind previously in the stages of the path, especially in the stages of developing bodhicitta. One of the two methods that have come down to us to develop that sense of responsibility or determination to help others is to recognize all of them as having been kind to us numberless times in the past. And one of the principal ways of doing that is to recognize that all sentient beings have been our mother over numberless lifetimes. The mother of this lifetime was not necessarily the mother of our life, of ourselves in our previous incarnation or in the life before that. But she was certainly our mother in some life in the distant past. And sometime before that also, in an infinite progression of past lives, our present mother has been our mother numberless times in the past. And just as in this lifetime, our mother has been perhaps the most kind person to us. Someone in the United States recently was murdered by the police. Maybe you've heard of this. I think his name was George Floyd. Maybe you've been following this. And it said that when his neck was being pressed by the knee of a policeman, and he couldn't breathe. He said, "I can't breathe." And he called out for his mother, who had passed away some years before that. Almost even as adults, like George Floyd, when there are problems, we think of our mother, to call for mother. So to remember that all sentient beings have been our mother is a great enterprise, a great meditation that we have to spend some time on. It's said to be one of the most difficult of the meditations to realize in the Lam Rim, the stages of the path, to recognize that all sentient beings have been our mother. Perhaps if you were to recognize that, the next step is to recognize that our mother has been kind in giving us our body, protecting us as we're an infant when we can't do anything, in giving us all the pleasures that we need, the love and affection and food and money and education. To recognize that all sentient beings are the same as having been our mother sometime in the past, numberless times in the past, is one of the greatest causes of developing a sense of affection for them, of love for them. The great master Atisha, when he came to Tibet, it's said that when he would look out the window of his, wherever he was living, at the cows that were in the field, maybe the yak also, he could be heard under his breath, "Mother." I remember seeing Lama Yeshe once in a similar kind of situation like that. Also with one particular student who was a great benefactor of Kopan Monastery, one nun, and she also often would be, also very argumentative and so forth. Sometimes when close to Lama, when she had finished some diatribe against him, he would say, "Mother, sentient beings, mother." So this is one of the great causes of developing this sense of indebtedness to others, and to generate this determination or responsibility to repay their kindness by leading them, not just this lifetime, helping our mom and dad through this life, but to bring about the greatest possible benefit for them, which is to lead them on the path. It may take many, many lifetimes, but to lead them on the path to achieving enlightenment, when they would be free from all suffering, have all possible qualities and happiness, determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit. So the text, the FPMT text, says from all sentient beings. The other texts and other ways of understanding it say for all sentient beings. Those sentient beings are more precious than a wish-fulfilling gem, a wish-fulfilling jewel. You may know of that when we talk about, when we offer the mandala offering. And one of the great things is the precious jewel, wish-fulfilling jewel, that a Chakravartin emperor has as one of his possessions. It's said that by cleaning the jewel in pure water and rubbing it and placing it at the top of a pole, like where you would have the flags or the banners around your monastery or your house. If you make prayers, if you are in possession of a wish-fulfilling gem, it can grant all temporal wishes. If you want to have wealth, if you want to have money, if you want to have friends, by praying in that way to the wish-fulfilling gem, those wishes, temporal wishes, can be fulfilled. It won't necessarily allow you to develop your mind. It won't help you on understanding the teachings of the Buddha, but it can give you some of the cooperative conditions that you need, housing and wealth and so forth, food. So sentient beings are more precious than a wish-fulfilling gem, because a wish-fulfilling gem, if you rely on it and you treat it properly, it can bring about temporal, success. You can bring about possessions and wealth and food and things that you need, friends and so forth. But it can't dictate how you will be reborn in the future. You can't pray to the wish-fulfilling gem and have it succeed to prevent you from falling into the hell realms or to give you a perfect human rebirth in the future. Whereas in relying on sentient beings and cherishing them, that would be the equivalent of cleaning the jewel and holding it in a high status. By cherishing others, taking care of them and considering them more important than ourselves, we can achieve the highest goal. So here, let's say if you're responsible to obtain the greatest benefit for sentient beings, what would that greatest benefit be? That would mean that you're aiming to lead them to enlightenment. And those sentient beings are more precious than since they're more precious than a wish-fulfilling gem, wish-fulfilling jewel, I will hold them most dear at all times. I will cherish them supremely all the time. This is usually the first practice I do after blessing of the speech in the morning is not always the very first one, sometimes there's other, but one of the first ones is the practice of Avalokiteshvara. And I always precede that with a recitation from memory of these 8 verses. So to start off in the morning thinking, I'm responsible to achieve the greatest benefit for all sentient beings who excel even the wish-fulfilling gem. I will cherish them most dearly. So that's a good way to start the day, as a motivation. The first course I attended, first Buddhist course I attended even, was at Kopan Monastery in 1974, when Lama Zopa Rinpoche was going to be giving I think it was at that point, the 7th Kopan course, 7th meditation course. At that point, he gave 2 courses a year for a couple of years. So the 7th, it wasn't 7 years after he started teaching. I think he'd been teaching for about 3 or 4 years at that time. And in that course, Lama Zopa, at the end of the course, he did give teachings on the 8 verses of training the mind, and he also gave the Avalokiteshvara 1,000-arm Chenrezi initiation. And so I've practiced it since then. What's that? 74, 26, and 20, 46 years. In a couple more years, it'll be 50 years reciting these 8 verses every day. I can't say that I have put them into practice, but they're something that has certainly helped my mind very much. So however you like to, it's probably good to memorize the verses to a certain extent, the way that you find that it's recited at the FPMT events and at ABC, determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit from. So the sense here, the Tibetan is a little bit ambiguous. It doesn't necessarily say from, but it can be understood that way. So if you talk about understanding it this way, what's the greatest benefit I can achieve from sentient beings? It's by holding them more dear than myself, by cherishing them more than I cherish myself, because in so doing, I can overcome the self-cherishing thought and eventually practice the Bodhisattva deeds, practice the various levels and achieve enlightenment. So that would be, if you understood it, a benefit from sentient beings. But I think in my mind, to say responsible or determined to achieve the greatest benefit for sentient beings who themselves excel the wish-fulfilling gem, more precious than the wish-fulfilling gem. I will hold them most dear at all times. So let's just sit for a moment and see if you can just think about this for a second. Contemplate. Sentient beings have been our mother numberless times. I mentioned that method to develop a sense of warmth and affection for them, but also recognizing even when they've been our enemy, even when they've been a stranger, they've benefited us. In the sense that the person who delivers the groceries, or who paves the roads, or who mans the electric center that provides electricity to your house, or whatever, they all indirectly benefit us, even if their aim was not to benefit us. Their aim was just to make a living, to provide for themselves. They indirectly benefit us. Even the people who pay us a salary, we think, oh, I worked, I deserve this salary. Unless there was someone to pay us that salary, we wouldn't be able to have that money to spend for our life needs. And certainly when people have been our enemy, as we'll see in some of the other verses, they've also been incredibly kind. And we can feel affection for them because they help to ripen our negative karma now, rather than in the lower realms in which we might remain for eons and eons. They give us a chance to practice patience, the greatest of all virtues. So think of this. All sentient beings have been our mother numberless times and depthlessly kind at those times. And even in other lifetimes when they were strangers that we had some relationship with, such as in the world, strangers in other universes, we don't necessarily see their benefit to us right now. And even when they've been enemies, they've been kind to us, they've benefited us. Recognizing that if we were to hold them, remembering their kindness and hold them in esteem as more important than ourself, cherish them more than we cherish ourself, that we can bring about the greatest benefit for ourselves and for them. The greatest benefit for ourself from cherishing sentient beings would be for ourselves to achieve enlightenment. The greatest benefit that we can achieve for sentient beings is to lead them on the path that leads to enlightenment. So there's much that can be said about this, obviously, and we will come back to it again. Determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit from all sentient beings, friends, enemies, strangers, I want to say all, who are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel, I will hold them most dear at all times. Or as the way that I'd like to recite it to myself, responsible to achieve the greatest benefit for all sentient beings who excel even the wish-fulfilling gem. I will constantly hold them most dear. Oh, this is a very useful idea to have at this time. You're all experiencing the same pandemic that's the COVID-19 that we're experiencing here in the States. There are all sorts of problems. And so if you would like to achieve a state of mind that is free of problems, this is one of the best ways to do that, to hold others as more dear. So just going on to the next verse, because we have 4 Sunday mornings, sort of try to cover 2 a day. We'll probably overlap a little with next time with this. The second verse says, wherever I am and whoever I am with, I will always consider myself the lowest of all, and from the depths of my heart hold others dear and supreme. So this is also translated in various ways into English by different people. Sometimes even the Tibetan versions have slightly different words, because this has come about from maybe the 12th century. We're in the 21st century. A lot of, at that point it was propagated verbally generally, maybe some, by many people. It was written word was existing, obviously, at that time, but there were sometimes slight variations. So the word, when we're saying I am with here, drok in Tibetan, can also mean whoever I'm with or whoever I assist. So sometimes in explaining this verse, it's said to be an antidote to the mind that, for instance, if in trying to help others, you have pride in your practice, I am practicing the training of the mind, the lojong, and I give this to others who are, I'm better than they are. One's actions will be polluted by that, obviously, by that state of pride. So whoever one helps or whoever one is with, I will consider myself to be the lowest of all in all ways. So here it says, wherever I am and whoever I am with. Another way of translating, I will always consider myself to be the lowest of all. Another way of understanding it is, whoever I'm with or whoever I am assisting, I will consider myself to be the lowest in all ways. The way that's translated here, wherever and whoever. So that can also, those 2 words, the kang that come in the Tibetan. Yeah, here, what does it say here? Kangdu sudang jokbe se. When I encounter sentient beings, or when I help sentient beings in whoever I help, in whatever way I help them, I will always consider myself to be the lowest of all, and from the depths of my heart, hold others supreme. I will cherish them as supreme. So, for instance, when we make offerings to those who are in need, sometimes we may think, I'm going to toss the money to the beggars or something like that. I remember in, I think it was in Sarnath with Lama Zopa Rinpoche once, and there was the usual throng of people coming, poor people, not just asking, demanding, some kind of help, some aid, some money, some paisa, as they say, some pennies. And Lama Zopa Rinpoche would always stop and meditate for some time, and he would give as much as he could to everyone, but directly with his own hand, with respect. So the sense of making offerings, there is a practice of charity, Bodhisattva's practice of charity, that's called the charity of charity. You give some money to someone else and you say, oh, I can't go there. Can you give this to those poor people? To help the person that you give the money to get used to giving to others, because they're giving your money away. But generally, when you give, if you're making offerings, not just to beggars, to other sangha on this, in this still, you're now, this is where I am is still the 15th of Sakadawa, still the full moon day. It's nighttime here. You're the second part of the month of Sakadawa. Sakadawa means Vaishaka, the Indian month of Vaishaka, that's named because of the constellation Vaishaka. Still, this month, the karma is multiplied. So you might like to make offerings to other Dharma friends. You might like to offer rosaries or Dharma books or money and so forth. So always do so with respect, considering them as better than yourself, holding yourself as lower rather than yourself as superior to them. I've mentioned when I was at ABC before, in various contexts, there's a Tibetan expression, in the springtime, the first grass grows in the low valleys. And as the summer progresses, the grass begins to grow along the sides of the hills. But it never grows on the top of the snow mountains. So what this is talking about is the fact that pride is one of the great obstacles to making spiritual realizations. Those individuals who are humble consider themselves low. It's said like the grass in the springtime grows first in the valleys, the low places. And as time progresses, it begins to grow along the slopes of the hills. So if you have a little bit of pride, it takes longer for spiritual realizations to take root in your mind. But at the end, with great pride, it never, realizations, very, very difficult to rise in a mind that's very proud. So this is, in a sense, also, has many, many levels of meaning. Wherever I am and whoever I am with, I will always consider myself the lowest of all, in all ways. So consider yourself lower in qualities, lower in education, lower in beauty, lower in all ways, and sincerely cherish them as supreme. When it says from the depth of my heart, another way of translating that expression is sincerely. Not just verbally, as saying, it helps still to just to say these verses, but to really try to develop a sense. Why are others supreme? We cherish them because they've been kind, and they're supreme because they excel the wish-fulfilling gem in their value to us. So we cherish them for that reason, because they're dear, because we feel affection for them, having been our mothers, or providing the infrastructure for us, giving us the opportunity to practice patience. But they all have qualities. Sometimes they have qualities that we don't recognize. With pride, we don't, it's very difficult to overcome pride. One of the antidotes that are given in the stages of the path, the Lanren teachings, is to say, for instance, to enumerate all of the various teachings of the Buddha, to think about all of them and to recognize how little we know about them, how little that we put into practice. The more that you know about the teachings, the more you recognize how little you know. And in so doing, say, for instance, when we talk about receiving blessings from our spiritual guides or teachers and so forth, if you think of yourself as being equal to them or even higher than them, very difficult for those blessings to come into your heart. The blessings come into you the more that you are humble. So I'll say more about this next time as a transition to the next two verses. We're just, my clock here, my watch just shows me that it's turned 10. So with a couple minutes, maybe just for just a few minutes, if there are any people that have some questions that are not, elaborate, that you have to explain for 5 minutes, if there are any short questions, I'll see if I can answer them before we end. And I'm not sure how this is going to work because I haven't done this before. Chan Hao or others will.
Hi, Venerable George. I think your Hon has raised her hand, so I've unmuted her.
Oh yes, I see that. Yeah. So we Gokwa.
Venerable George. Good evening. Yes. Thank you very much we are eating into your sleep time. But I'm very.
No, not my free time. There may be something else that you see. Yeah.
Yes. And it has been a great lesson for me. Revision all the time. So little we know and so much we forget when I do this practice. A short question, simple question. In doing this particular practice, my question is, how does forgiveness comes into this? Because it is difficult as it is to think of, like you said, all sentient beings as having been our mothers in many, many lives past. And in the way we lived our life, there will always be conflicts and so on and so forth. And then sometimes we have situations where we take a lot longer to forgive. So how does forgiveness comes into this part of the practice? How do we manage this so that we can be more sincere in our practice?
Yeah, good question. Of course, each of these verses, I'm sure there would be a way of associating forgiveness or dealing with resentment that we still have for others with each of these verses. But in general, I remember once, it was a long time ago, talking there was a library that used to be near the old ABC. And I remember giving a talk there once.
Buddhist library, Venerable Buddhist library.
Yeah, Buddhist library, yeah.
Library,
yes. I remember giving a talk there and mentioning how, just to recognize impermanence when we have problems of resentment or, just to recognize that the people that we may think dislike us or that we dislike, all of these things are impermanent and changing. Yes. And I gave the example of if you were at a party and you were standing behind one potted plant and you overheard someone that you thought didn't like you and they mentioned to another person, Kokwas has all of these great qualities, or George has all of these great qualities, or this, they're a nice person. And your whole, just to recognize that in that instant, your mind could change completely. The resentment could go, or the fear, or the,
yes.
The idea that they might be criticizing you could go. Just to recognize impermanence that, recently when I was sick, last year, I had Lyme disease.
Yes. Yes.
At one point, I almost thought I was going to be dying. And just to think of the little irritations in my mind of
Yes.
individuals, I can almost place them in places in my mind up there. As we have to die, we have to leave this life, and to think that that over some trivial little events that we might have had some resentment for someone and not opened our hearts to them, not wished for their welfare and their happiness and their success and so forth. Was so, to think that there might still be some remnants of that in my mind, in my mind, many, but was in the face of thinking, oh, I might be dying, was very revealing to me, that as we have to leave this life, as all of these situations change, just from that point of view alone, and there are many other ways of understanding, and recognizing from the point of view of the verses that we talked about today, some of the topics we talked about today, when we feel resentment for someone may have caused some problems for us or even for others, and so we feel resentment for them because they're harming others.
Right.
To recognize that this is giving us the opportunity of practicing patience. This is giving us the opportunity of practicing tonglen. Imagine sincerely taking on their bad behavior.
Right.
The state of mind that's their self-cherishing that is causing them to act in ways that are detrimental to myself or detrimental to others. When we do the Lama Chopa Puja, the Guru Puja,
yes,
in the lojong section of that, there's a verse that says, "Nuchu Digbe," when the world and the inhabitants therein are filled with the fruits of our past negative actions, and undesired suffering falls like rain. Grant me blessings to transform these adverse conditions into the path by seeing them as the exhaustion of negative karma. So in the commentaries it mentions, imagine taking on all of these pandemics, all of the suffering of the world, or all the suffering of others, even individuals that are a problem for us or a problem for others. Imagine taking those on oneself, and in so doing, exhausting one's own store of negative karma through patience.
yes,
So that individual then is seen as an aid to us. I've mentioned in some of the other courses there was one disciplinarian when we were at the Sangha together at Kopan many years ago, who was he was caught up in the job, was trying to be very wrathful, probably, with good intention probably, but was a pain. But recognizing that we had to practice patience a lot. When he was sent somewhere else, Lama Yeshe sent him to another country to work at one of the centers, and we recognized afterwards, although it was calmer, without his criticisms and so forth,
yes.
we actually we missed now the opportunity of practicing patience. So anyway,
yes.
Anyway, I'll leave it at that. That may come up in some of the other verses.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Yeah, pleasure. If before I end, is there any other one? Let's say one last question. If not, don't worry.
Sukim, do you have a question? You have raised your hand earlier.
Okay, I have.
Sukim.
Hi.
Hey.
Yeah.
I don't see you, but you see me, I guess.
I like to ask, you mentioned that, okay, self-cherishing, I can see that there's a problem, okay. But cherishing one's family is also, to you, or at least in this practice, considered also a kind of self-cherishing, cherishing one's family. And
Yeah, it's not necessarily, well, cherishing others is more important than oneself. So with respect to one's family, if one can take the responsibility and suffer, to take care of them, that's good. When I was talking about, say, for instance, when people consider patriots that give their life for their country, killing the enemy for their own countrymen, that's not pure self-cherishing. Do you understand what I'm saying? That
yeah,
especially with one's own family, that isn't necessarily, much of one's activity is based on attachment and affection for them as yours, whereas you wouldn't do the same activities for other people. So although that from a worldly point of view, an individual who works for their family, who cherishes their family, takes care of their family, that's considered to be altruistic, and in general, better than just thinking of oneself. One has to recognize whether one is doing that out of attachment. For instance, when we talk about the equanimity meditation as a prelude to developing bodhicitta, before we develop affection for sentient beings, we have to recognize that that affection should be equal toward all beings, friends, enemies, and strangers. Family should be, the affection should be the same as for strangers and even for enemies. Otherwise, what we consider to be cherishing others, it's easy to cherish others that are your family, that praise you, that are your friends. That's not considered to be so great a spiritual quality. But to cherish strangers equally to them, your family might consider it to be rude if you go out for ice cream and you offer some ice cream to some strangers also. They think, well, why are you doing that? You're taking us out for ice cream. Or even the enemy. So that's something to think about. The equanimity meditation is meant to be a prelude to warming the mind to develop affection for all sentient beings. So if you don't use that as a prelude, if you don't have that preliminary first, the equalizing friend, enemy, and stranger, that all sentient beings, your present family has been your enemies in past. They've been, in past lives, they've been strangers. And your present enemies or strangers have been friends and family numberless times. So without that prelude, it's very difficult to develop a authentic cherishing of others. There's the tendency of imagining one's attachment for others, one's pleasure with them because you're friends or family, as cherishing in the sense of the training of the mind. So what we want to be able to do is to cherish all living beings equally. That's a short answer right now. So we've gone over about, my clock says about 13 minutes, going on 15 minutes over. So I will leave it there. And next Sunday morning, we'll go on to the third and fourth verse. I'll try to talk a little bit more about the second verse. Thank you very much. Have a very good coming days of Sakadawa.
Venerable George,
Yeah.
It's next Saturday morning, not Sunday morning.
Oh, Saturday morning, right. It's Friday night here. Sorry, I'm misspeaking. Because it's Friday night here, and it's Saturday morning there. Okay. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.